So welcome to Book Chat. Today, Assisting Hands Home Care is very honored to be hosting Linda Ruth Stai, who is coming to us from the Midwest. And we are very thankful to her son, who is a fellow owner of a Assisting Hands franchise. So that's how we met. And I keep admitting people as I'm telling you a little bit about us. Assisting Hands Home Care has been in the Maryland, Potomac, Bethesda area for almost 10 years. And I joined about 5 years ago. And I come to this world from the arts and healing for aging. And I spent over 35 years developing programs to use free medicine, that is the arts, to help people feel better. And one of my most exciting and most adventurous groups that I worked with were the veterans at the Washington Hospital Center. And we'll talk a little bit more about that later. But we feel very strongly that using art in the home care world makes us very different and also helps our caregivers fight burnout, as well as our clients feel like they really are finding joy through the day because they're doing what they love to do. And that may be making art, it may be making poetry, it may be singing along to show tunes, maybe reading good books aloud. All of that feeds our creative side and helps us improve our mental and physical well-being. So I'm going to ask everybody to mute at this point, or I'll mute everybody depending on how capable you are. And I'm going to ask you to save your questions for towards the end, and we'll do a Q&A. We also record these and repost them on our video blog on our website. So we've got about 30 book chats now to review, including one with Dwayne Hills, who I see is here, who recently published One Block West of the White House. And it's a fabulous read. And I see some other book chat folks. Sherry Grant's here. She's a wonderful musician, but she also is a haiku artist. And Tim Truitt is here. Wow, this is a great group. Tim wrote a wonderful video imagery book about our environmental issues, saving our planet through awareness of God, my brain just climate issues. So let's keep going forward and talk about Linda. So welcome, Linda.
Hi, Patricia. I am excited to be here with you today to talk about my newest book and the reasons I wrote it and the impact it's having. So I really appreciate you inviting me.
So let's go back in history a little bit and tell us, I've got this wonderful article up here for those folks who want to read about it, but tell us about how you started being a writer. What inspires you? What's your passion?
I've been a writer all my life. It's just in me. It's something I have to do. When I was a little girl, I would write stories and plays for myself and my friends to do, and even one that the kids in school did when I was in 6th grade. Reading has been my favorite subject, reading in English. I'm a bookworm. I've written some poetry, and I took one course when I was an adult in writing through the mail correspondence course. And I did take one writing course with a wonderful woman, Ruth Peterman, at the Northwestern College in Minneapolis, or St. Paul, where a couple of my children were going at the time. Just kept doing different things. The first thing that I had published was a children's drama for a Christmas program in Sunday school. And I have written other dramas for adults and for teens. And then when I met Gary, when we got married, I started hearing all of his stories about Vietnam and the war. And I realized I was married to a real life hero. And I wanted to put those stories down on paper, but it didn't seem like the right time. So in the meantime, I started writing some other books. I got an idea for a book that I just felt like I had to get down on paper. And the idea comes from something that happened, an incident in my mother's family years ago, and my mother had told me about it. I can't tell you the incident because that would give away the theme of the book. But that book is called The Rose Journal. I do have that one here with me. And I wrote that one about little Scandinavian family. I wrote it to be entertaining. But the main theme of the book is how God can make good come through suffering. And I have had people comment on all three of my books that they couldn't put it down. And that's the best compliment I could ever get. So after I finished that book, then people were asking what happened to these characters. So I wrote a second book called Primrose Papers, and I have that one here too. And that one was, both of these books are on Amazon. That one took place partly in West Central Minnesota with this little Scandinavian family that I had started with in the first book. And the other part takes place in England, where I was privileged to spend a couple of weeks there. And I think it was 2006 with a friend of mine who had served in the military in the Air Force for 6 years. She was stationed in England. And much of the stories in that book about the places that I went as a tourist are also things that I experienced. So that's been really fun. And then about maybe 12, 13, 15 years ago, my husband and I started going to the reunions for the 5th Battalion, 7th Cavalry. They had every 2 years, and we made it to all of them. And I started to get to know these other soldiers, the veterans and their wives. Of course, Gary got reacquainted with some, and it was very emotional meetings when these men met each other after all these years, in particular his captain and his first sergeant and another sergeant. I began to hear their stories and realized that I needed to write a book about all of them. So 4 years ago in Pennsylvania, when we had our reunion, I interviewed 11 of these men, well, 10, my husband is the 11th. And actually a couple I did not meet. I had to do an interview through the mail. One person I haven't actually met yet because he wasn't able to make it to the last reunion. But the others I interviewed at the reunion. And I just have to tell you that I am so proud of these men because they really shared their hearts. They shared their emotions, their feelings, their fears, and their stories are all in this book. I tried to retain most of their own wordage and language. I did a lot of reorganizing, but it is their stories that come through in the book, and that's what is having the impact.
Yeah, they're very beautiful. What I like most about the stories is that you've caught their personality in each one. It's like
Thank you.
you're a talented writer, so you were able to make that transition and not make them all sound like the same voice.
Good.
Each veteran came from a very different background. They had different goals, intentions, fears, and it's fascinating how you made each character come alive to me. And I think that's a real gift.
Thank you. That's one thing I really appreciated because as we got to know these people, it was amazing because Gary and I developed close friendships with people from the infantry all the way up to the officers. And so that when I wrote the book, I was able to write the stories from their perspective as far as each of these positions that the men were in. So that gives the book a more well-rounded viewpoint of the whole war.
Yeah. And for those of us who were young children, not of drafting age during the Vietnam War era, these stories are really remarkable and shed a very different perspective of how things played out for these individuals. And of course, you know, I'm sure if you talk to Navy personnel or Marine Corps personnel, you'd get different stories again from their perspective. Because as we all know, the 5 branches of the armed services all operate very differently with different code of laws.
Yes.
I learned that very quickly at the Veterans Hospital where I was trying to help the long-term care
I'm sure
system there gain some support for the veterans. It was very interesting.
Yes.
So why don't you read a little bit from the book? Give us a little taste of how you write and one of your favorite stories, maybe just, you know, a couple of paragraphs.
All right. This is a story from one of the officers. His name is Tim Curry. And he talks about the sleeping situation that they had. The way they lived, the way these men lived was incredible as far as what they did without, and yet they were able to step up to the plate and do their job. He wrote, we slept on the ground on poncho liners. If we were lucky, sometimes we got an air mattress. I limped my air mattress along for several months with numerous patches made from tape lifted from the mortar rounds we carried. The patches were not a complete success. I would blow the mattress up and try to fall asleep before the air leaked out. This provided amusing entertainment for my foxhole buddies who still speak of it today. One evening, as the forward observer was adjusting fire for covering our defenses in the event of a night attack, my mattress was blown away by our own artillery, again, to the great amusement of my buddies. So there are stories in here. It talks about the tragedy of the war, but it also talks about the humorous incidents. And the one thing is the bonding that these men had together. There's two reasons that I mainly wrote the book. And one was to honor these men as the heroes they truly were. Because the Vietnam War was unique in a sense that the wars before that, the World Wars and the Korean War, most of the men, as I understand it, they tried to contain them in the same units or the same companies all the way through the war as much as possible. And the survivors were able to reconnect after the war, soon after the war often, and form long-term, lifelong friendships. But the Vietnam War was different. These men were referred to as pennies by the military. And my husband felt that that is really the value they had at the time in their eyes. And many of them were killed in action and moved on to other units. And so they never developed that consistency. In fact, it's amazing that they have a real bond because at the time, many of these men were too afraid to get emotionally connected with another person because they didn't know if they'd even be alive the next day, of course.
Right. And what I gleaned, especially from this writing, is that most of the kids who were drafted really figured it was a death sentence.
Yes.
And that if they survived the year, it would be a miracle. Many
Yes.
of them said things like, if I survive the year, I'll do Sundays. I'll go to Sunday church every week or something. They were very, authentic in their awareness of what was going to happen to them or possibly happen to them. And also that there was a need to really connect because these fellows were going to be the last people to see you alive. And, I run a death cafe every month to talk about death and dying. Mm-hmm. And, these kids weren't thinking about death and dying at 19 and 20. They were, their frontal lobes were hardly fully formed. And here they were drafted and being thrown into situations that they had no clue about. Right. Some of these kids had never been on a bus before, let alone a plane.
Yes.
And just the whole adventure.
And some of them looked forward to it as an adventure too. And they were surprised when they got there. But also the men, the big thing too, is when they got home. Well, when they left for the war, the people in other wars had been admired and respected and honored and welcomed with parades when they got home. But the Vietnam men were ridiculed and just generally made fun of. Some were spat upon. After the war, they continued to be ridiculed and never felt rewarded for their service, which is one reason I want this book to be out there, because I want people to see the heroes they were. And also to prevent misconceptions that a lot of people, especially the younger people, think I have of the Vietnam War and the soldiers, how they acted there. Because, for one example, the people have often thought of Vietnam soldiers, veterans, as baby killers. I've heard that term. And it was so untrue. The men were not expected to go and be with the children, but the children would come to them. And my husband would tell stories of how the children just loved them, and the officers would put salve on their wounds, medicine for them, and give them candy, and just precious. He has some pictures of him with the children that are just precious. So they were definitely.
And I think to sort of underscore the importance of these men and their work, what I like about each chapter, which is a story of itself, is that you identify the awards given to this individual, the
Mhm.
medals and honors by the armed services, even though, when they got home, they quickly took off their uniforms and hid all that because they were not being treated well. And that's a travesty for our nation. And I was really surprised to hear that the VFW didn't even welcome some of these guys back. I mean, to
Yes,
me, that's their club.
I
If
know.
any place should have welcomed them back, it should have been the VFW.
And a lot of them did get the help from the Veterans Administration that they needed until many, many years later, although the VA has learned from them. And now they have a much better way of handling people that return from, like, were from Afghanistan and Iraq,
Absolutely.
and dealing
Oh,
with PTSD to help these men, because so many of the men, including my husband, did
oh,
not realize that they had PTSD for many, many years, maybe even until they retired. We talked to another man last week at a book signing that my husband and I were at, and he had not talked about this at all for 50 years. And now his family is encouraging him to get the help that he needs.
mhm.
And
That's a huge piece. And we saw, I mean, I've seen a lot of that in the Washington area, but I saw that with World War II veterans as well, that they never really shared their stories. And until maybe their children were grown adults with families,
Mhm.
you know, and they were at
Yes,
end of life and saying, look, part of my legacy is XYZ from the war.
right.
It's it's the same thing with Holocaust survivors. They're,
Mhm.
you I think that's part of the PTSD, is that it's very, very difficult to share and relive some of those stories.
Yes. And the sooner they get help for it, the better.
Yeah. And we certainly need more support for our veterans all the time.
Yes, definitely.
And in fact, one of the young men who came to me at the Veterans Hospital to work for me as a consultant in arts and healing was a musician who had served 3 times in Afghanistan.
Mm.
And he said the only thing that kept him going was his music, that that's how he got through it. And now he was being hired to work in the Veterans Hospital wing for long-term care to help both the families and the residents and the staff feel better about themselves through music.
That's wonderful. It's all different ways of
So
reaching.
powerful for him.
Yes.
So I'd like to also have you read from another section, which I think is quite fun, because there's lots of sad in this book. So
Yes.
we're going to try to avoid most of the
Yeah.
sad,
There is
but
humor and good too.
it's a good stories. Page 64. Oh wait, we did that one. I'm so sorry.
That's all
I
right.
I went to the exact same page. Um, well, maybe we need to go to something a little more deep. How about 105, about losing friends?
All right. I'll read a couple paragraphs there. The times we'd lose guys were hard. In one sense, I got used to it. This story is, let's see who wrote this one. I need to give him credit for that. The best and the worst. This was Jim Bolden's story. The times we'd lose guys were hard. In one sense, I got used to it. In another sense, I hardened myself emotionally. I stiffened myself. But at the time, it hurt. We'd get in some action and soldiers would get killed. The next morning, we heard, "Buck up, soldier, we gotta move out." You thought about it, but you didn't think about it. It never got away from you. When more men got killed, the lasting effects were larger. One of my best friends over there was a guy named Gravel. He had a gravelly voice with a drawl. He had the greatest line in the world. I was born in Tennessee, grew up in Vietnam. So true.
Yeah, I
Comment.
think that was definitely a theme running through it, especially when you realize that so many of these young men were really young, 18, 19, 20,
Yes. And
21. I mean,
the
you know,
heroic things that they did, they all stepped to the plate. They became men over there if they weren't to begin with. My husband often likes to say, John Wayne only dreamed about doing things that these men did.
Mhm.
All of those who are familiar with John Wayne and his war stories.
Absolutely. And for those of you who aren't familiar with the armed services, Linda has very thoughtfully put in a very comprehensive glossary, which, I thought was a great idea. And really, and then your references in the back as well, quoting from some other articles. I mean, it's clear that you really did your research and were beyond just rewriting their words, but really developing them into making sense to the reader.
I tried to write at the beginning kind of an introduction to those who are not familiar with it. And like I said before, especially young people, just to give a basic understanding of the war itself, what it was about, how it happened. And then at the end, I did have a chapter included on recognizing PTSD. I am just not an expert, except in the sense that I am married to a veteran. Yes, the first chapter was mainly an introduction for readers who are not familiar with the Vietnam War, particularly younger people. And this was to just help them understand basic issues about why and how the war happened and how it went. And then toward the end, I put another chapter in that helped people to understand something about PTSD and how to recognize it and know if you need help. And I am not a professional by any means, except that for the fact that I am married to a Vietnam veteran who had PTSD.
I think that makes you
Still
pretty
has,
expert.
something they never get over. But thank you. But I did have valued resources there that I have some information from. So people, the family members can see too if they need to help encourage their loved one to get the help for his sake and for their sake.
Yep. So what was the process for you in terms of publishing? Let's switch out to some of the logistics. You write this book. It takes years of research and interviewing and developing the words and putting them in the right order. And then I know, how did you decide to do the publishing?
Well, I did what I have done before. I was very fortunate because when I wrote my first novel, the Rose Journal, I wondered how to go about that. And I knew that in order to get a book published, you needed to get an agent or go to different conferences for writers. And I had been to some just for information for myself. But I also happened to have a friend who was a fabulous artist. And my son Caleb was a marketing major. And so for the first book, I asked for their help. This was before he developed Assisting Homes, when he had a little more time on his hands. And I asked for their help, and I did research on how to publish it myself. And so I formed my own publishing company, which is called DACA Publishing. And I hired a publisher, a printer to go through it. And I have hired many editors, well, some editors through the years. I have many friends who are very intelligent, knowledgeable, that have helped me with the editing process. So each book has taken me many years because I have gone over the editing process time and time again. And I was honored with my first book, even though it was self-published. Barnes & Noble and Amazon wanted it immediately, and it was in their stores. And well, Barnes & Noble stores and
Right.
on Amazon. And so I felt credited by having that accomplished. So
That's
then
great.
the second book, I went the same route. I did have another friend, Vicki, who helped me, Vicki Keating, who helped me with the technical stuff, which Caleb had done because by that time we had 3 children, little ones. But my friend Roxy again did the cover. So for this book, Remember Me, I went the same route as far as publishing. I did hire, let's see, let me get the name of the company. I have it in the book. A company from California to help me with the final print setup. And I'm looking for that now. That was Creative Publishing, Book Design. That's what it's called. And they helped get the cover for me, which I thought was amazing. The cover.
That's perfect.
My friend Roxy, who did the other books, wasn't interested in doing a painting of the war,
Yeah.
which is, I totally understand, because I
No, I
never
think,
dreamed that I'd write a story about
and
war.
the photographs in the old fashioned format, the way we used to always get prints made when we were kids in the
Yeah,
60s with the little white
right,
border and the black
right.
and white post, well, they're color photos, but still it
Yes.
has that feel. It's a great job. You
Yeah,
did a wonderful job.
I have to tell you too that the soldier on the cover is my husband, Gary. He did not want to be on the cover, but I told him, well, it would look right if I put another man on the cover. So he agreed. So he is there, and he chose the helicopter photo as the second one
Yeah,
because those helicopters were lifesavers to these men.
sure.
And
It's
then the
like they
little
were living
flower,
on an
actually,
island, right?
right, the little forget-me-not flower was drawn by my friend Roxy. And as you probably well know, the forget-me-not is a flower that is often a symbol used by veterans. So that seemed appropriate too, to go on the cover.
Well, this is great, Linda. I think everybody's learned so much from you. I'm going to open it up for just a couple of minutes for some Q&A. If you don't want to ask the question, you want to put it in chat, I'm happy to ask it for you. But if you have a question, unmute yourself and ask Linda or I a question. Or you can show an appreciation. Either way works great. How many of you have read the book? Any show of hands? Oh, okay, great. So this is an opportunity. Book chat is a great opportunity to learn about a book that you might want to read. They're also usually great books for book clubs. And then you've got this recording to go back to when everybody's finished reading the book. You can talk, back and forth with this recording. It helps a lot. So anybody have a question? All right, well, I'm going to ask a couple more questions then. I feel like, there's a whole generation out there that is clueless about wars past, before Afghanistan or Iran, Iraq. And I'm just wondering if you have any interest in going into schools, or do you feel like this is a book that, I'm not sure who your audience exact demographic is for this. Have you thought about that?
Well, that's interesting because my husband and I have been invited to speak to students at a high school and elementary school close by, the Maple Lake High School in Minnesota. And I've discovered that they do a really big event every year on Veterans Day through the years. We live only 7 miles away, and I have not known that. So we will speak to the elementary students and also to the high school students that day. And we will make our talks age appropriate, of course. But that is a great opportunity to get this knowledge into the schools and help them understand. And so we are very open to doing more of this. Also, just kind of an interesting sidelight, our oldest grandson, Connor, was a junior last year in high school. And his class, I'm not sure what the theme was for the whole class, but he wrote a story about the Vietnam War. And so he interviewed Gary for that. And it was a wonderful time. Gary showed him lots of pictures that he has and talked about it. And it was amazing. It was a bonding experience for them. And I think it was wonderful that that school made the effort to help students to get a greater understanding of it.
That's fantastic. Dwayne, did you have a thought?
Yeah, can you hear me? Okay.
I can hear you. I can't see you. I can only see one person besides Patricia.
Okay.
Yeah.
I just wanted to make a comment that I was in high school. I think it was my sophomore or junior year. I was worried sick that I would be graduating and being shipped off to Vietnam. I have so much respect for those that went.
Well, thank you very much.
And I was very fortunate because by the time I graduated, the war was, had ended. But yeah, I have so much respect for those gentlemen and women that
I really appreciate that.
circumstances. I just couldn't fathom how I would have survived that.
Well, and I'm sure these
Thank
men
you.
starting couldn't either, but they, like I said, they stepped up to the plate and just did what they needed to do. And I'm sure they're the same.
I wonder how many of you are also familiar with Public Radio's StoryCorps. They go around the country collecting stories and posting them in a web vault, so to speak, an accessible web vault. But I was thinking about these stories and what your next step might be. Like, what would you like to see happen next with this book, besides becoming a bestseller and winning the Pulitzer?
Well, as far as expectations, I am open to just about anything. I'm praying about it and expecting to be led in the right direction. My main feeling is that I just want to help people. I want to help these men to receive the credit that they never did get after the war. I want to help through their healing process. And I have heard that from many of them, I've got letters, emails, phone calls from some of the men in the book, some men who have just read it, telling me about how it has truly helped in their healing process. And that's the biggest reward to me. That is mainly why I wrote the book, and that means the world to me.
Yeah, that's beautiful. That is just beautiful. Well, I hope you do more interviews, because as a trained oral historian, I love listening to the stories. And I'm sure you do too, but you have a beautiful way of translating those stories into real life stories, readable stories. And I so appreciate the work you've done on this. I thank you and thank all the veterans, both foreign and domestic, who have had to fight in these wars. So sad.
Thank you, Patricia. Thank you, Steve, for getting us into this too. I really appreciate the opportunity to share.
Thank you. And I appreciate everyone being here. We provide book chat every month. And now that you've joined us once, you'll be on our book chat list. So if you're interested in staying on the list, great. If you get my email and you'd rather not, just let me know. I'll unsubscribe you. It's that simple. And we also offer a program called What's Your Plan? And we bring in an expert from the world of senior living, home care, anything that helps you age well. And my boss, Steve Lorberbaum, has a half-hour chat with an expert in the field. We also offer Death Cafe every month on Zoom, and we talk about death and dying in a non-political, non-religious way. And it helps people deal with all sorts of challenges relating around death and dying. So please feel free to let me know by email that you'd like to join in either of those other groups, and I'll be happy to put you on those Zoom lists. And I wish you all a wonderful, wonderful day. And thank you so much for joining us at Book Chat with Linda Ruth Stai.
Thank you.